Adam, did you grow up playing team sports?
Yeah, rugby. I played a lot of rugby growing up.
Alright, so let's pretend it's a rugby match. We're halfway through the year, so it's that 40-minute mark. So let's get together for some halftime adjustments.
Get your head in the game.
Hello and welcome to Revolutions of Our Time, the podcast where we explore protests and revolutions, past and present, and try to make sense of it all. Joining me, as always, is the multi-passport man himself. Adam, how are you today?
Morning, Sam. I'm doing fine. It's 7:45 in the morning here and looking to be a lovely day. So yeah, doing good.
Glad to hear it. I noticed while editing a previous podcast that I could hear some birds in Amsterdam, and I'm very excited for you.
Yeah, we got some birds. We got a lot of parrots here, green parakeets in Amsterdam, and they are a very pretty invasive species, but they are also quite noisy.
Well, it brings up an interesting point in that Adam lives in central Amsterdam, and I've never once heard any people shouting, any cars. It's presumably just people walking past and people on bicycles. The only thing I've ever heard is birds. And here I am recording in a closet because my sealed room out there has a road outside it in the quiet suburbs. So yeah, glad to hear summer is going well in the Netherlands. Today, I thought it'd be a good idea to check in on the world. We spend a lot of time in the past or in the abstract of theory or fiction. But ultimately, what we do applies to the world today. Why do we talk about these topics if they're not applicable?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think it's nice to check in, see where we're at, see how we might reassess and regroup.
Yeah, so today is essentially going to be a state of the world in 2025, part one. It's the first half of the year, so we'll be looking at stuff from the beginning of the year up through about end of June, so about 6 months of events. But before that, we have an Independence Day to celebrate. The one I would like to highlight from around the time the episode will be released is August 5th, which is the independence of Burkina Faso. And I have a lot to say on this one. So It was originally called French Upper Volta, and when it became independent in 1960, it was still known as just the Upper Volta. And it's had a very turbulent history over the years, and it's in a land ravaged by Western imperialism. And it's had coups in 1966, 74, 80, 82, 83, 87, and twice in 2022. Its name was changed in 1984 from the French colonial name to Burkina Faso by President Thomas Sankara.
Big up.
Big up indeed. He'll definitely have an episode or two specifically about him. But the name combines two local languages. Burkina, meaning upright or honest, from the Maure language, and Faso, meaning fatherland, from the Diola language. I probably butchered all of that, but combining to make the land of honest men.
That's beautiful.
So wanted to highlight this time under Sankara because he's one of the most important leftist leaders, in my opinion, and we will definitely have more to say about him later on. But he ruled from 1983 to 1987, and in this time he led the country in staunch socialist, anti-imperialist policies. He rejected all foreign aid. He nationalized all land and mineral wealth, which is where most of their wealth comes from. This reduced the IMF and World Bank influence in the country by virtually all. His domestic policies included nationwide literacy campaigns, land redistribution to regular citizens, railway and road construction, and the outlawing of female genital mutilation, forced marriages, and polygamy. Sankara's government promoted public health by vaccinating 2.5 million children against meningitis, yellow fever, and measles. He was also an extremely early environmentalist, successfully planting 10 million trees to combat desertification of the Sahel. And this was all done in 4 years.
Wow.
As you might know, Adam, Sankara was killed in a coup in 1987 that was backed by both France and the US because he refused to play the game they had set up on the world stage. But his legacy lives on today. I mentioned there was a coup, well, there were two coups in 2022. The second one put their current interim president, Ibrahim Traore, in charge, who is the second youngest leader in the world, only older than the Prime Minister of Iceland. I'm going to attempt this name. Kristrún Frostridóttir. He's older than her by 2 months.
Wow.
He's 37 years old. And he wears the exact same military regale that Sankara did and is mimicking his policies pretty much. He's rejecting foreign aid. He's investing in the country. He's nationalizing their resources. And too early to tell if it'll create long-standing change in that country, which has just been zapped of all of its wealth over the years. There are two criticisms of him. One, he is a dictator. He's called interim president. When he took power in 2022, they said there would be elections in 2025. There have not been any progress on that. However, he is extremely popular amongst the people of Burkina Faso. Second critique, he is very close with Russia. That being said, Russia does not get any preferential treatment in regards to their trade deals or their mineral deals.
When I was in West Africa for work a couple of years back, I found that amongst sort of ordinary people, Russia had a lot of support, and this was puzzling to us. But a man explained to us that it was simply because they are enemies with France. And that is the right. Main basis of Russia's support in West Africa, is that their enemies are the French, which I suppose I can understand that.
Yeah. They like the tricolor, red, white, and blue, just not in that specific French way. Not
in that order, not in that orientation.
Yeah. But that kind of begs the question, is a benevolent dictator for the people a bad thing, Adam?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm sure you're familiar with Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast.
I am. And
I remember in that when he was talking about Genghis Khan, maybe, but he made the case that when you have a dictator, I think he was specifically talking about monarchs at the time, but then you're rolling the dice, right? And maybe you get someone who is an enlightened despot and rules benevolently, and that's great. The problem is you don't have any way to check that power. I think there are plenty of people who have argued throughout history that no, it's not a bad thing. Plato among them, right? He thought that democracy was a bad idea and that it gave way to demagoguery, and that the ideal form of government was a philosopher king. But I have an a priori objection to the notion of a dictator. I would much rather people get to vest their freedom, vest their power in the say of government. And indeed, I want to expand that to other fields of life than just politics. I want to expand it to the workplace as well, which I believe can act as a check on the power of the demagoguery of the democratic systems are potentially open to.
No, that's a good point. I wholeheartedly agree with you. It is interesting to observe benevolent dictators. Well, it's all the perspective, right? To the capitalist business owners, they are not benevolent at all.
No.
But to the people like Sankara, it's interesting to see how much they can get done. Let's jump into this year. Let's look at the things that have popped up that really relate to what we talk about on a weekly basis. We will not be covering everything, obviously. We will not be focusing on one country too much either. So sorry, Americans. This is not just going to be me talking about Trump the whole time. I know there would be a lot to talk about. And if we've missed something in a country you're interested in, please leave it in the comments of our social media. We would welcome that discussion, or on YouTube. But these are just some highlights that we'll be running through. Before we do that, a question for you, Adam. Do you feel that based on our political views and ideals, the world has gone in a positive or negative direction this year?
Generally fairly negative in terms of the sort of material changes that actually seem to be relevant and impacting people. However, I do think there is something of a vibe shift occurring, whereby it feels like amongst and perhaps this is my own algorithmic bias, but it feels like, again, amongst the masses, a sort of more left populist system of ideals is beginning to take over. I think that the overwhelming popularity of Zoran Mamdani is a testament to that. In an episode we released a couple of weeks ago, you expressed your skepticism that he would win the election, or the Democratic primary rather, but that he seems to have walked away with the primary vote. So in a material sense, no, I don't think it's gone well. I do think that perhaps a vibe shift is occurring. The question is whether that vibe can shift fast enough, and whether that vibe shift can be converted into actual organizing.
Yeah, I think that we are seeing that a lot of people, young and old alike, are seeing the thing that we pointed out in one of our first episodes, which is that neoliberalism cannot combat fascism. And they're starting to recognize fascism at work directly in front of their face and begging their neoliberal party leaders to do something about it and seeing that they can't. So I've seen a lot of radicalization over the past half year. But yeah, we'll talk about Zoran a bit as well. And to start, I wanted to touch on not 2025, but December 2024, because that was a very huge month in protest and in revolution. And it's had some effects that have rung out into this year. The first is Syria.
Oh, yeah.
The Assad regime fell December 8th after 54 years in power. This was sort of a coalition of many different ideological factions. They have set a goal of democratic process in the country. I mean, there's been hundreds of thousands of people that were refugees that have flooded back into the country, whether to just visit for the first time in 13 years, 14 years, or to move back permanently. There were over 2,000 political prisoners freed.
From a truly horrible prison, as I understand it. Really a horrific sight.
Yeah. And with Syria, it's an interesting case because they were always the rallying cry for the European far right about this horde of refugees coming in. And in my head, I was always like, you know, if we work together to solve the problems in their homeland, they won't be coming to your country because no one wants to be a refugee.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that now with so many people going back. Now, the one thing that worries me about Syria is, will it be a break in the cycle of repression, or will it either just become a stronghold of Western imperial influence or a factitious warring situation like in Libya? Can it snap back to some form of civil democracy without colonial interference? What do you think?
I hope that it can. I noted that I don't know too much about this, but I know that the PKK, the Kurdish resistance, has agreed to lay down their arms in Rojava in northeast Syria, and that is slightly disappointing because although yes, it's great for Syria as a nation, the Rojavan constitution is one of the most progressive political constitutions in the world, rivaled only by Chiapas in Mexico, and the Kurds, and particularly the PKK, were the most effective fighting force against ISIS. They held a pretty incredible resistance against Turkish aggression, who used the Kurdish autonomy as an existential threat. So that is something that I don't necessarily see playing out well. I suspect the autonomy may need to be defended. I could be wrong, of course. But yeah, I hope that we can see Syria emerge as a multi-party, multi-ethnic democracy. I would love to go to Damascus, so that would be, on a personal level, a big dream of mine, but obviously for the people of the nation first. So
I had the PKK later on, but since you brought it up, yeah, I potentially see it as a good thing. I potentially see this group agreeing to lay down their arms as a positive situation because I think it shows that they have faith in this new system they're establishing, and maybe they know something we don't. Backroom agreements, etc. And I doubt that they've turned in their weapons to the government completely. I think if needed, they could maybe bounce back into formation, but I think what they're hoping for is what has happened over in Iraq. And, you know, we can critique the US puppet state that is Iraq right now, but life for Kurds in Iraq is better now than it has been in living memory, right? They have their own autonomous region in the north, and it's very autonomous. And I believe one of the most prosperous regions of Iraq. Erbil is the big city there. For sure. And I think that that's what the PKK potentially sees the opportunity for, in this new Syria is a peaceful autonomy and a better life for their people than they've seen in living memory.
I wonder also if they've taken some inspiration from, or heeded a warning from, Lebanon. After the civil war, there were various armed groups in Lebanon, and a sectarian state was founded where governance was divided along religious lines, and
their governance is very intricate. Like only a Shiite can be vice president, and only I'm just pulling this from my head, but it's like you have to be a specific religious group to be in a specific role in the government. And those population percentages were so much different when that was agreed as well.
Absolutely the case, and there's the Christians who are the minority, but they're the richest, and then you've got the Shias and the Sunnis, and Hezbollah was the only group that did not de-arm, and sure, the degree to which this is true is debated, but I heard from someone from Lebanon that their belief that the reason the Lebanese state was always so tenuous is in part because of the tension of having one of these groups refusing to de-arm. So maybe that was also part of the PKK's willingness to relinquish their armed nature.
Well, we've talked about Northern Ireland a lot, or north of Ireland, depending on your perspective, and
this is a North of Ireland podcast.
Close your ears to my friends that are Protestant in Northern Ireland. But we've talked about compromise, and we've talked about when do you lay down your arms and pursue a good faith peace, and maybe it's that bridge that the PKK decided to cross at this point. And I believe PKK translated stands for like the Kurdistan's People Army.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, we will check back in on that at the end of the year and see if it was a good move or not. I'm hopeful in this situation, and we'll see.
Hopeful.
Luigi Mangione, just an update.
Wow.
He allegedly assassinated United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson on December 4th. America was united in celebration. He was caught. He was perp walked with like Mayor Eric Adams there. It was this whole really weird spectacle. His trial date has not been set, and he most likely won't have a trial until at least 2026 at the earliest. United Healthcare continues to see record profit, especially in their projections, and especially amidst recent Medicaid cuts by President Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah.
So America is not as united as it once was on this issue. We will stay tuned on Luigi Mangione's case, and we will not forget him, because I think that's what they want us to do. Now, the last thing from 2024 was South Korean protests in December. Hundreds of thousands of South Koreans demanded President Yoon's removal after he attempted martial law in December, effectively trying to become a dictator, which South Korea has had several times in the past, and that started with martial law back then as well. This was really a people's protest, a people's movement. A lot of K-pop stars came out in support as well. They were buying food and water and drinks for all the protesters, remotely. And I see this as peak liberalism done correctly, because there was a famous moment that was a tipping point when opposition politician An Gui-rong, which I probably said incorrectly, grabbed a soldier's gun and demanded that they move aside to let the National Assembly into the building so they could vote to dissolve the martial law. And they did. The soldiers laid down their weapons and let them in, and they were able to do the vote, and his own party voted against the martial law. And I remembered this moment several times during the Trump presidency so far, where ICE and Doge and all these masked goons are raiding public offices and taking social security number records and masks and all this stuff going on, and the Democratic politicians are just standing outside saying, let us in, let us in. And I saw that as, why can't you have your Korean moment there? Barge in. You're a senator, you're a representative for the US, so get arrested for your constituents. So Adam, was that moment in South Korea sort of the peak of what liberalism can be in its best form, I guess?
I suppose so. It's funny because, in a way, and I suppose this is speaking to the success that liberalism has had in normalizing itself as an ideology, because it doesn't strike me as a particularly political protest, in a sense, what went on in South Korea, more so an objection to the attempt to subvert democratic norms, which is not necessarily tied to liberalism, but does have that effect in this instance, based on how it all played out and what the actual results of this protest were. As I recall, wasn't the whole declaration of martial law just about the fact that he had some corruption scandals breaking and wanted to get on top of those?
Pretty much, which was kind of the reason for the other dictatorships as well.
Right, wow,
if I remember correctly. So, congratulations on South Korea maintaining democracy. Good job. I'd like to move on to some elections. I know we're a protests and revolutions podcast, but ultimately those are not necessary if elections go well, right?
Right.
So there's 3 that I'd really like to highlight, 3 national elections, and I do apologize that they are all extremely white countries, but that's just the way it went this year. The first is Germany, which was February 23rd. What do you know about the German election? Just off the top of your head, what do you remember from it, Adam, since you're next door, as it were?
Well, everyone was worried that the AfD, the German far-right party, would be the largest party at the end of the election and have a chance to form the government. There was some talk of a maybe leftist, of green politicians and a Baerbock perhaps achieving power, but they weren't able to capitalize on that. And in the end, it was Olaf Scholz, who's a fairly traditional centrist politician, who, with the SDU, the Social Democrats, I believe, and with a fairly tenuous coalition that is currently ruling Germany, and has not been tremendously popular within Germany, as I understand it.
So, yeah, AfD in English, Alternative for Germany. They're basically a Nazi party funded by Elon Musk, famously as well. And I saw a lot of protests against that. It was a coalition of the CDU/CSU, which is like the center-right Christian party.
Yeah. Which Angela Merkel was the leader of. That was her party.
And the SPD, which is the Social Democratic Party, they formed this ruling coalition, and it's Friedrich Merz. He's the chancellor. He's the leader of the...
Right. Scholz was the guy before whose government collapsed.
So Scholz is the leader of SPD.
Right.
Merz is CDU.
Right.
Technically, the SPD won more percentage of the votes, so I'm a little confused of what negotiations went in to make the other party the ruling one.
Well, it depends on your electoral system, right? You can win a higher percentage, but not win the seats just based on how gerrymandered it is. Okay. I mean, in the UK election last year, Jeremy Corbyn in 2019 won a higher percentage of the vote than Keir Starmer did in this election, but Corbyn's party was destroyed and Starmer won a huge majority.
Now, we pointed to South Korea as being peak liberalism, and I feel like this, at least on paper, looks like the worst of liberalism, because you have the left and the right coming together to form this government, which kind of just shows that there really isn't a big difference between them. Right. They'd rather stand together than let any far left people into the club. So that's what I took away from that. Then we had Canada, April 28th. Now, this election, it's kind of similar to the UK. I mean, it comes from that structure where they can announce an election due to certain reasons within the party, and these coalitions can break apart. It was sparked because the alliance of the Liberal Party, which was Justin Trudeau, and the New Democratic Party, which was Jagmeet Singh, they're more of a left-wing party, their coalition broke down last year. It was both of the leaders kind of breaking it off, and Trudeau insisted on staying in power. He was certain he would run for re-election, but his party mutinied against him, so they ran someone else in his place. He stepped down. And the 2 people that sparked this election, Trudeau and Singh, ended up both being losers. Singh had gained a lot of momentum over the last few years. I remember seeing him a lot on social media. A very charismatic Sikh guy.
Yeah, I've seen him on social media. He's been popular online for a while.
He was popular amongst his voters as well, but this go-round, he lost a lot of momentum, and he actually lost his seat in Parliament and resigned from the party. So the left wing in Canada was really on the rise the past few years, and then just came to a grinding halt the past few. And this election is interesting because it's a clear domino effect from Donald Trump getting elected. And I'll touch on that a bit in a second, because the last one we'll talk about is Australia, which was May 3rd. And it was a similar situation to Canada in that the center-right party was projected to win in both of these elections last year. Everyone knew that their time was up. It was kind of like in the UK, where it didn't matter who ran against the Conservatives. Right. The pendulum had swung the other way. The other party had been in power too long, lost a lot of goodwill with the people. Material conditions had worsened. And then comes Trump, who is right-wing, and in places like Canada, places like Australia, that is a cancer on your party to be associated in any way to Trump. So in Canada, the Liberal Party won, and in Australia, Labour won by a landslide. And last year, they were projected to lose by a landslide.
And in Australia, it's interesting to note the Liberal Party is what they call the Conservative Party.
Yeah, they're the Liberal National Coalition, technically.
Oh, okay, interesting.
But Adam, how long do you think neoliberal governments can ride the anti-Trump wave, and what's the danger of that?
Until the next election. I think that Britain in particular, and I speak with Britain because that's the electoral system with which I'm most familiar, currently projected to have a reform government at the next election, because Labour is
horrifying.
Yeah, Labour is effectively a centre-right party at this point and has not passed any measures to improve people's material conditions, whilst enacting several measures that will likely worsen them. I don't know, if these neoliberal governments can pull their finger out and actually make some improvements to people's lives, pass some left populist policies, then they may end up doing quite well. Of course, who is the most popular world leader in the world? Claudia Sheinbaum, the leftist leader of Mexico, who has passed some very popular left populist policies. But also, as you pointed out to me, has appealed to the right by being very hard on the cartels at the same time.
Yeah, her goon squads are quite violent.
So, obviously, that's not my preferred way of going about things, but if people do insist on being centrist...
There is that, and also just giving old people money. No questions asked.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So if people want to adopt a position as a centrist, you can be a centrist. You just have to be bold and adopt actually centrist positions rather than this conservative tinkering with neoliberal models. And I think that in Canada in particular, Mark Carney, who's now the Prime Minister, it's two establishments. He was the Governor of the Bank of England before he was Prime Minister of Canada. And you can't get
England. What?
Yeah, he was the Governor of Bank of England during Brexit, and you really can't get more institutional than the Bank of England.
And I think a danger of that is just what you're saying, is that the only other parties that are actually saying they will change things are the far right. So you have Reform promising things, but they're promising horrifying things and blaming the wrong people for the problems. So you run the danger of losing to a party like that if you stand for nothing, like Labour currently does. Now, we mentioned it before, but the New York City mayoral primary did give me a lot of hope. I was trying to find some leftist victories this year in politics, but that seems to be the biggest one. And that's Zoran Mamdani winning in June the Democratic primary over Andrew Cuomo, who was backed by every establishment money source possible. And there are many factors working against him in November to win the general election. But if he wins, I think it will be a huge shift in American politics. Trump has threatened to arrest him simply for his political beliefs, saying, quote, "There's no place for a communist in America."
Yeah, and Mamdani's threatened to arrest Netanyahu if he were to come to New York.
Yeah. Let's perp walk him.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded, just thinking of what could be if Mamdani wins and inspires a more radical left take on electoral politics in America. We spoke on fiction last episode, and I'm reminded of a quote from Tolkien. So we're going fantasy this time. And it's referring to when Merry and Pippin are brought to Fangorn Forest, and Gandalf says, "Merry and Pippin were brought to Fangorn, and their coming was like the falling of small stones that starts an avalanche in the mountains. A thing is about to happen which has not happened since the elder days. The Ents are going to wake up and find that they are strong."
Oh, shivers, such a line.
If he wins, the American people will wake up, at least some of them, and know that they're strong.
I think there is some hope for that in cities, right? American cities have quite a high degree of independence, I think, because of how power and capital is focused in general, but particularly in the States, right? New York is one of the most global cities in the world. I'm sure they would claim to be the most global city in the world. Depends how you measure it. Los Angeles, powerful. Chicago. And these are cities that by and large detest Trump.
Yeah.
And I think in there will be local politicians who are more effectively able to pull on the levers of power. Because when you're working at a mayoral level rather than a national level, you can really focus on the problems that affect people's day-to-day lives, right? Like, if you're trying to rule the entire United States, messaging is, I mean, it doesn't seem to have mattered for Trump, but messaging is hard. It hasn't mattered for Trump because he can just lie, like make up problems that are affecting everyone.
The right wing everywhere has realized now that you just don't have to tell any grain of truth at all.
Yeah, for sure.
You remember Snopes? Like, remember when people would check Snopes?
Yeah, I remember.
Oh, Obama said this stat, but like, it actually was slightly off from that. He said 48%, and it was 44%.
Right, yeah. What a time that was. Those halcyon days. But when you're at a mayor, you can say, look, this road's covered in potholes. This bus service sucks. In Mamdani's case, it's that groceries are too expensive, so we're going to open some city-run grocery stores.
The age-old adage, the rent is too damn high.
The rent is too damn high. That is always a winning slogan, because you know what? The rent is too damn high.
Yeah.
So I do think that, like, in my more optimistic moments, I think that we may end up seeing a Mamdani turn within cities at first.
Mm-hmm.
And with hope, that can then build momentum for a more national level movement if it is not crushed by either Trump or the internal machinations of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I'm just realizing now that socialism in American history always stems from New York, right? FDR, Bernie Sanders is born there. Now you got Mamdani.
I wonder if that's just because New York is such a dense city, right? Like, you are in such close proximity with people that you have to adopt this more sort of communally minded mindset because that is simply more efficient.
I believe that's how humans adapted. It was to live in closer proximity than we live now in, like, the suburbs. I've felt better when I moved from a more spaced out living situation to a denser city in my life. Just feeling the community of others around me.
Yeah, it's freaky how far apart stuff is in America. Buildings are far apart.
I think it's freaky because it pretends it's not, right? Like, it'd be one thing if I was living on a farm out in the middle of nowhere. You'd expect it to be a long drive to the grocery store.
Yeah.
But yeah, suburbs, I think, are the worst of everything. Suburbs suck.
Cities are this space in which that community living, again, as you say, not to the extent that we do, but you do live in closer proximity to the people around you, and that can breed better standards of living. You know, in Amsterdam, we don't actually have a ton of green space, relatively. We have a few parks, but they're quite small, and we use the public space that we have very well. People set up little tables and chairs just outside of their house on the street. People will be having a drink or dinner basically on the pavement of an evening, and that's all lovely and normal. And there are ways of improving these living standards from within cities that you can't do on a national level. I'm thinking of Paris specifically, where since COVID, the mayor, Anne Hidalgo, has really focused on the cycling infrastructure in Paris and massively improved Paris as a cycling city, which has dropped air pollution quite considerably within the city. Even London has dropped air pollution considerably by adopting a low emissions zone throughout the city, and that doesn't really affect anyone except for seeing less polluting cars in the city, but it does have a material impact on people's health.
Zoran Mamdani does give me hope. We will see at the end of the year if he was successful or not, because there's a lot of things working against him, but we will see. Also, a tiny shout out to Madeira, the island owned by Portugal, who voted for autonomous rule on March 23rd. And
didn't hear about successful. That. Cool. Well done, Madeira.
Can you give us a Cristiano Ronaldo celebrate?
No, I can't.
This is why we'll never have iShow speed numbers, okay? Now, there we go. Thank you for that. Now, on to protests. I don't think we'll discuss these individually as deeply, but I just want to run through a few notable protests around the world that have occurred this year. Obviously, there's been ICE raids in America. Trump is doing horrendous stuff to every institutional structure you can imagine, from the Supreme Court to the Constitution to anything and everything. So there have been huge protests in the U.S. against ICE specifically. That's been the main one because they're essentially the Gestapo.
And they now have a budget larger than the Russian military. The entire Russian military, because of the big beautiful bill.
They have a budget larger than the U.S. Marine Corps.
It's crazy.
Well. Insane. So those will continue, I'm sure, and there'll be a lot to report back on. It's been horrendous, just the dehumanizing of individuals here. Now, on to Africa. Kenya has had some anti-corruption student protests. I don't know if you've heard about these at all. I haven't really, but it did strike a chord when I read about them because it was sparked by the death of a teacher and a blogger named Albert Ojwang, who was outspoken against government corruption, and he was arrested and died in police custody. And the police reports basically said, natural causes, and there was a private autopsy done that indicated he was beaten to death by the police. This sparked widespread protests against corruption, and these are mostly taking place in Nairobi, and these are ongoing. So we'll see if they result in anything by the end of the year. The first pro-democracy rallies in many years have taken place in Guinea and Mali.
Cool.
Stay tuned on that. And I have one success story, a huge protest success story in Mongolia. Have you heard anything about this, Adam?
No, nothing.
I hadn't either, but following a spending report about the prime minister's son, protests erupted.
Wait, there was a whole report based on this guy's son?
Basically, it was an investigation.
Okay,
so,
right.
It was an investigation into corruption of the embezzlement of government funds by the prime minister's son.
Okay, wow.
Enabled by the prime minister.
Mm-hmm.
Protests erupted. They were led by the youth, rallying against broader government corruption as a whole and mismanagement. They had one clear goal: the resignation of the prime minister. I will attempt his name now. Mongolian names are very difficult. Luvasan Masrain Oyun Erdin.
Cool. Good effort.
Thank you. Sure, it doesn't sound anything like that. But this included public demonstrations. 59,000 people signed a petition calling for his resignation. And this led to a vote of no confidence in the Mongolian parliament. And the Democratic Party, which he was the head of, was expelled from the ruling coalition, and the prime minister resigned. So we have here a complete victory, a complete capitulation to the protesters, which you do not see very often at all.
Congratulations, Mongolia. Well done. This is the specific goal achieved. Well done.
Yeah, good job. We have Serbia, which I'm sure you've seen a lot in the news. These actually started in November 2024, but continue to this day.
Yeah, they're still huge.
Yeah, they are still huge. They were sparked by the collapse of a canopy at the Novi Sad railway station, and it led to wider anti-corruption protests. We talk about the spark of protests usually coming from something relatively small, but usually that small thing, 16 people died, so it's not tiny, but on a nationwide scale, it is a wider indication of corruption and mismanagement and a lot of other breadcrumbs you can follow. Their goals are justice for the victims of the railway station collapse, accountability for government negligence, the resignation of Transportation Minister Goran Vesic, and several other senior state officials. And this one's mostly student-led, and the students themselves have a lot more goals, but those ones I mentioned above are the main wider goals. So we will see by the time the year is over, that will have been over a year if these are still going on. So yeah, we will see. As Adam said, they're huge still.
Yeah, hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating in Belgrade.
In a relatively small country as well. That's a pretty big percent of their population. We have one more in Africa, Togo. There's a rapper named Amron who was arrested in May after being a part of large anti-corruption protests. And his arrest sparked more intense protests in which, over the course of the last month or so, 10 people have died and over 100 were arrested. That was in June alone. So that's just one to keep an eye on with Togo. See what's going on there and see if the youth movement there leads to something wider. Bangladesh, this is kind of the France of South Asia. So that's why I won't mention too much of this, but
Bangladesh is the France of South Asia. Is great. Okay.
In terms of protests, for sure. It's a national pastime.
Okay. I see.
Yeah, huge protests in May from civil servants and students for real elections, not sort of just these local elections that don't really lead to change at the top of their society. The reason I'm not diving too deep is just because they protest a lot. There are huge protests all the time there. The numbers are staggering. You'll have some in Dhaka with over 1 million people and you'll be like, what's it for? Didn't they just have one last month? I mean, I attended an education conference 2 years ago and I went to a presentation about Bangladesh and their education system. The presenter was like, you might notice that these university transcripts are pretty random. There doesn't seem to be a clear start date or end date from school to school or from year to year in Bangladesh. And that's because students are unionized. Students go on strike all the time. Wow. The janitorial staff, the professors, the administrators, there's always someone protesting at a university in Bangladesh. So that disrupts their academic calendar pretty much annually.
Wow.
You just get random dates. The leader of their country resigned last year, but I mean, obviously from these protests, it isn't changing much. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Finally, pro-Palestinian protests continue across the world, but are getting more dangerous with countries cracking down on anti-Israeli sentiments. Recently, we had Glastonbury in the UK. There was a lot said on that front. There were a lot of musicians coming out in support of Palestine against the BBC's censorship of pro-Palestinian acts. And I think we mentioned last episode sort of no, it's the kids that are wrong moment from Labour. Just every Labour minister calling out these acts as terrorist supporters and whatnot.
Yeah, Palestine Action is now officially a terrorist group in the UK. So we have to be careful about what we say about it. But yeah.
They're a group. They exist.
They are a group. They exist. If you are a member, you can spend 14 years in prison. You can have 6 months in prison just for supporting them. The day after the prescription of Palestine Action went into effect, there was a protest outside of Parliament in which various people expressed their support for Palestine Action, criticising the prescription of the group. It is the first time that a non-violent group has been designated a terrorist group in the UK, and one of the people arrested was a woman who was an 83-year-old priest, expressing her support for Palestine Action.
When you start arresting people like that, you're crossing into very specific territory, and I'm reminded of U.S. military arresting these very old monks in Saigon during the Vietnam War who were protesting.
It's not a good look, arresting old folks like that.
No, and I think we mentioned before that in Hong Kong, sometimes when the protests were escalating a lot, there were groups of old people that would spearhead the next protest because they felt that their presence was disarming to the police.
Yeah, I remember talking about that.
And I think phone checks in the US are becoming increasingly common when you're entering the United States, whether you're a citizen or not. Has this been something that European countries have been?
Not really. Not at borders yet.
We'll keep an eye out for that.
At protests, maybe, but there are quite specific rules on how they can unlock your phone, and that's why you're advised to disable Face ID on your phone when you go to a protest, because they can't hack into it, but they can hold it up to your face so that it unlocks.
Yeah, I think that'll be something to keep an eye on, because me and Adam have been talking offline about how Trump will implement something horrifying and European leaders will condemn it only to just do the same thing quietly. So we'll see come the end of the year if any American allies have started implementing that tactic as well. But yeah, those are the protests I wanted to highlight. And anything you want to add? Anything I missed? Any environmental ones that had some notable situations?
There have been lots of environmental protests. Just Stop Oil has been very active at, for example, pro-Palestinian demonstrations, and the British counter-terrorism force is now looking into Just Stop Oil because of their presence at pro-Palestinian protests. The Freedom Flotilla being a part of that, on trying to deliver aid to Palestine. But in terms of broader environmental protests, none that come to mind immediately. It's been a big year for protests. The No Kings protest in the United States have captured heart and minds. 5 million people in one day protesting across the United States. That's pretty huge, possibly more.
Yeah, I think it was quite a bit more, but that, I mean, we sit here about a month after that,
Yep.
and nothing has changed.
Not yet. No.
A lot of liberals have patted themselves on the back for that day.
Yeah.
So I think we just need to be very wary of, I mean, that movement that organized it as well, I'm kind of skeptical on. It's like the 5051 movement. There's a lot of evidence that they're funded by big Democratic donors that kind of just want to see it as controlled opposition, right? Like, we're doing something right now, but we'll see. There are a lot of other groups that join in with that are doing a lot more. So we'll keep an eye on that. We'll see if this is indeed controlled opposition and performance, or if there's something more meaningful to come. We'll see.
We'll see.
Now, on to armed resistance / aspirational revolutions. We talked about the PKK. This is where I was going to bring that up. We wish them well. We'll check back in on them. Myanmar. This one, February 2021, was when the coup took place. Basically, a fascist junta retook the country after about a decade of democratic rule, and they are not popular with the Burmese people at all. And this situation is kind of a mess, so I'm not going to dive too deep into it. Optimistically, I'll say it's kind of a mess in a good way, in that in this civil war, even with Chinese backing, the dictatorship has not been able to get any meaningful victories against the rebels. The resistance has been somewhat successful by all accounts. There's several groups out there that work together, but they're still fighting the good fight. And there's a lot of young Burmese people around the world, like students, that are constantly in activism mode, trying to garner support against the fascist government. So that's just something to keep an eye on. A slow burn. That's going to be a long, long road ahead, I think, for Myanmar.
Yeah.
And ones that I won't even dive into as deeply are Sudan and Yemen, which are very messy.
Yeah.
And we can only hope that there's peaceful headway coming soon there.
Some of the videos coming out of Yemen are crazy. I've not seen piracy live streamed like that before. And again, have to be careful what we say, but if nothing else, the videography is pretty impressive.
Right. And I just wanted to include them just so that they're not forgotten, right? There are these conflicts going on around the world that there's something to keeping them in mind
as we move through the world. Yeah.
And finally, Ukraine war update. Europe continues to rearm, which is scary.
Yeah. Committed to 5% of GDP to being defense spending now, which is crazy as social welfare states are crumbling.
Yeah, never thought I'd see that day, to be honest. And Western European nations pledging a lot of money to not just their own military structure, but to Ukraine. Those stock bros and speculative accounts online telling you, which stocks you should buy, they're all in on European defense contractors, and it's so gross to hear that there's people excited about making some money off this.
Yeah, it's gross.
And on another part of the Ukraine front is obviously the US has basically abandoned them, which was expected but is horrifying. Ukraine, as well as the NATO countries bordering Russia, have left the treaties that outlawed landmines in their countries.
Wow.
That was within the past few weeks. I think it was last week. So that looks very bleak ahead. And I think the only thing I want to bring up about Ukraine is that I think parties like the Labour Party in the UK use Ukraine as the only leg to stand on. I think that was the only policy that Keir Starmer stated at all in his campaign, right? Was just backing Ukraine.
It's the only one that he maintains. He stated many policies, but most of them have been abandoned.
And that's not to say that I disagree with him supporting Ukraine, but that is to say that I think that some countries are using it as a crutch to maintain their own power in their countries.
Yeah, it's a shame because Ukraine does need that support, as you say, but it always seems like, and this is again something I think that will lead to reform right-wing victories, is that there always seems to be money for war and not for anything else.
Yeah, always. Now, we didn't discuss a lot of South America or Asia, East Asia at least. It's been fairly quiet on those fronts. South America had a lot of leftist victories in the past few years, but there weren't any this half of the year. But some are going strong, some not as much. Lula in Brazil, who is historically very popular, is losing momentum. So need to keep an eye on that. In Colombia, similar to Mexico, leftist leader wins and by all accounts is doing very well. We'll continue to root for that. But yeah, just to kind of close it out, I have a few questions. We kind of ended on a bleak note. I'm going to hang on to that one Mongolian win to keep me going. But are you optimistic going into the second half of this year, Adam, from where we sit?
No. No, I am not. But what's the phrase? Pessimism of the will, optimism of the soul, something like that. Like, I think that, hope is something that is not twee. We ended a quote with it the other week, but hope is something that is covered in dirt and blood and comes up swinging. So am I optimistic? No, but I'll keep chipping away at the vibe shift and seeing what can be done there.
Is there anything that excites you coming up? I think for me, like, awaiting that New York race is exciting, but also nerve-wracking because I have no say in that vote.
Yeah. I'm excited about Zoran Mandani. I am excited by a push that the Green Party has made in the UK, and I'm excited by Zara Sultana's resignation from the Labour Party in the UK. Zara Sultana is a popular left-wing politician in the UK, and she announced that she is leaving the Labour Party to form a new party with Jeremy Corbyn.
Wow.
And this came just like a week and a half ago. Details about it are very thin. There are some people that are worried that this will steal votes from Labour and make a reform government more likely. The projections at the moment are already suggesting a reform government, and I'm hoping that something can be done if they are clever about it, like what happened in France, where you strategically stand candidates alongside other left-wing parties in a coalition of the willing to head off the right-wing parties, and I think that could end up being quite effective if it is done well.
So there's Green and there's Sinn Féin.
Yeah.
Is there any others that could be in that coalition of the willing?
The Liberal Democrats recently have their manifesto at the last election was in some instances more to the left than Labour. So Liberal Democrats have sort of stepped a little bit to the left as Labour has stepped to the right. Yeah. The SNP is traditionally a fairly left-wing party. So yeah, these could all come together in this sense. And the left wing of the Labour Party, if they can resist the machinery. Starmer's done a fairly good job of crushing the party's left wing, but
he's pulled his playbook directly from the American Democratic Party.
Yeah, and they're making exactly the same mistakes.
Yep. So, those are some prospects going forward that excite you.
How about yourself?
I mean, it's hard to be super optimistic about anything from where I sit in the United States. I guess what I am optimistic about is sort of what we discussed at the top, which is that I've noticed so many more people becoming class conscious and now are just waiting for the vocabulary to go along with it. And to some direction of where to go. So I'm not hopeful for anything immediately in the United States, at least, but I'm hopeful that as this generation ages, there will be a lot more leftists and a lot fewer liberals, because I see it happening with my own peer group in a city that's not super leftist, but just anecdotally and seeing how many people online share our sentiments as well. So I think it's in it for the long haul, but if we can thank Trump for anything, it's helping a lot of liberal Democrat people in the US realize that that party is useless.
Yeah. I'm also excited for the Dutch elections in October. The government headed by the far-right People's Freedom Party collapsed.
Is that already coming back around? I feel like they just formed.
Yeah, well, it was the government, the last elections in the Netherlands were in November 2023. They managed to form a government in June or July 2024. That government collapsed.
Who would have thought a government spearheaded by that guy would collapse?
Who would have thought? Ultimately, it was an internal protest within the government about an immigration bill, but if it wasn't that, it would have been something else. It was always hanging on by a thread. So we've got new elections coming up in October. And the right-wing parties, well, the People's Freedom Party is about as popular as it was, but the other parties that formed the coalition have become a lot less popular. So we'll see what can be done with that.
All right, so we got the Dutch election coming up. I mean, the counter to all this democracy talk is check in with China over there. Still doing well.
Still doing well, yeah. China just kind of doing their thing, making money. Yes.
They don't have to do anything at the moment. They just gain international support and partnerships by just not being the United States.
Yeah, right.
Or Russia. Okay, so we've talked about what excites us. We've touched on it a bit, but is there anything specific that scares you about the next 6 months?
Oh, yeah, we're only 6 months into the Trump presidency, so I'm scared to see what happens after that.
Yeah.
That's the big one. And, we're seeing some pretty horrific climate results already this summer, and I'm sure it will only get worse. And I'm also worried about what's going to happen with AI, because it seems like ChatGPT is dissolving people's brains, according to a study. Like, that does appear to be literally happening, that people are forgetting how to think.
Yeah.
I've taken a pretty hard line against the robots now. I was always pretty anti-robot, but now I'm very anti-robot.
I'm only for the ones in Futurama that hang out with you and drink beer.
Those robots are fine. Bender B. Rodriguez, will be spared during the revolution.
Mi gente from Mexico. But, okay, now, do you feel that there is anything to the resistance against the dominant fascist political structure facing many parts of the world right now? Like, is there any substance? Is there anything tangible brewing? Or is it, at the moment, pretty intangible?
I think it's fairly intangible for the most part, but I think that people are getting better about organizing. You're seeing more groups pop up, more like community groups, more protest groups. There's more interest in alternative political organizations, more interest in grassroots measures. And so, whilst I think it remains fairly intangible at the moment, I have hopes that is shifting.
And last question for you. Do we still have to go deeper into the darkness before we can see any light?
Do we have to?
Do you think we will have to?
Well, there's the question. Do we have to intrinsically? No. Will we? I suspect yes. I think we are not at the peak of darkness yet.
Yeah, that's kind of a scary thought.
What I do take some comfort from is the sheer incompetence and thin-skinned nature of the fascists that we see around us. The falling out of Donald Trump and Elon Musk, the borderline illiteracy of the right wing in the US. The UK, reform, for all this talk of a reformed government, it's not clear that they can actually field enough candidates to do that. There are not enough people interested in being in support. There was some example of a by-election in the UK where a Reform councillor stepped down and left. His deputy was an 18-year-old because that was the only person they could find who was a member of the party who was willing to fill that position. So the fact that people are realizing they're weird little freaks, the fact that they are thin-skinned and that their personal interrelations not being based on principled measures, but rather a sort of philosophy of fear and domination, does leave it ultimately very weak. And so I do take some comfort from that as well.
Well, I mean, there's a running trope in the US that, like, all these MAGA uncles just complain at the holidays. No one invites them anywhere for Thanksgiving or Christmas anymore. And I think that was fairly niche in the UK back in the day. And I think if you dedicate your life to the far right, that's where it ends up, is no one wants to be around you.
Yeah.
I think there's also hope in that. I used to kind of fear the young far right and how numerous they were getting. But I think, as you said, ChatGPT is breaking their brains in particular. So I fear them a bit less nowadays now that they can't critically think. Not that they could much before, but even less so now.
I also think that the Gen Zs being conservative is a bit of a myth. I think there's some reports coming out about this at the moment, and I want to look into it more before speaking more about it. Maybe that's an episode coming up, but I think that we've seen some loud and high-profile conservative Gen Zs, but I don't think that is actually broadly reflective of the beliefs of the generation.
I think that's widely true. My sample size was at a 4th of July party, and there were a few people telling me how they were ashamed to be celebrating anything that day. But then there was one guy who is Gen Z that was there wearing a shirt with a bald eagle chilling on the beach with a Trump haircut, and it said, Gulf of America established 2025.
Ugh.
Anyway, maybe we do have to go a bit deeper into the darkness before we see the light, but time will tell. I had a lot of fun recording this episode, and I hope we can check back in at the end of the year.
Yeah, let's see how we do.
And see what's going on. I can look back at our predictions. Maybe we'll be a bit more hopeful then than we are right now. I don't know, have you enjoyed our State of the World check-in?
I don't know if enjoyed is the right word, but it's good to keep tabs on what's been going on.
Yeah, we're going to plunge our mental health for an hour and then cleanse it after. But I have some hope. And thank you, dear listener, for staying with us. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it and follow us on social media. Adam, can you close us out with this quote seen at several protests around the world this year?
They tried to bury us, but we are the seeds.